Welcome, everybody. My name is Bryn Durgan, and I'm the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. Thank you so much for being here. And obviously, we're here today with Craig Pittman, award-winning author, journalist, and Florida literary legend. Yeah. So Craig has written six nonfiction. Yeah. Craig has written six nonfiction books about Florida. Six. That's quite a few. His most recent two books, The State You're In, Florida Men, Florida Women, and Other Wildlife, and Manatee Insanity, Inside the War Over Florida's Most Endangered Species, were recently released in paperback. As an independent bookstore, we really appreciate your support and your support of local authors like Craig. So if you didn't get a chance to buy your copies before the event started, then you can just always go downstairs and grab them after the event. And I know Craig is more than happy to sign your books.
I'll even sign my real name this time.
Exactly. So in the next hour, Craig will talk a little bit about his work, and we have some fun Florida trivia to do that of course links back to his work. And then we'll open it up for everyone here to ask some questions. So before we get to that, let me introduce Craig. So Craig Pittman is a native Floridian, an author, a podcaster, and an award-winning environmental reporter. Born in Pensacola, he graduated from Troy State University in Alabama, where his muckraking work for the student paper prompted an agitated dean to label him the most destructive force on campus.
All right.
I don't think it was a compliment either.
Yeah.
Weird.
In 31 years at the Tampa Bay Times, he covered a variety of beats and several natural disasters, including wildfires, hurricanes, and the Florida legislature. He now writes a weekly column for the Florida Phoenix and is co-host of the popular podcast Welcome to Florida. As I said, he's the author of 6 nonfiction books about Florida, including the New York Times bestseller, Oh, Florida, How America's Weirdest State Influences the Rest of the Country. There it is, we have it downstairs as well. And Cattail, the wild, weird battle to save the Florida panther, which Garden and Gun magazine named one of the 20 best books of 2020. That's also downstairs. His most recent one, published in 2021, is The State You're In Florida Men, Florida Women, and Other Wildlife. The Florida Heritage Book Festival named him a Florida literary legend in 2020. He lives in St. Petersburg with his wife and 2 children. So now I'll let Craig take it from here.
Hi. No, keep going. That's let me tell you a little bit about sort of the origin story of this stuff. So in 2016, my book, Oh, Florida, How America's Weirdest State Influences the Rest of the Country came out. And it had been rejected by 15 different publishers who all said, nah, too original. Nobody cares about Florida, nah. But fortunately, St. Martin's Press said, we think that's a great idea for the election year, because they know every 4 years the rest of the country kind of gives Florida the side eye and wonders how we're going to screw things up. So it came out, it got rave reviews in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, made the New York Times bestseller list for all of a week, which is just enough for them to stick that sticker on the front of the paperback edition. And so as I went around the state talking to people about Oh, Florida, 2 things happened. One was that everybody came up to me afterwards and gave me their Florida stories, some of which I cannot repeat, some of which I can. I think my favorite one is the couple who discovered that their new next-door neighbors were running an illegal nudist bed and breakfast. And the way they found out is they gave their kids a trampoline for Christmas. But the other thing that happened was people were saying, we need a sequel. When are you going to write a sequel? We want a sequel to Oh, Florida. And I said, I feel like I said everything I can say with Oh, Florida. No, there's been so many other weird things that have happened that you didn't even touch on. You really need to put that in there, put stuff in there. You need to do a new one. You need to do Oh, Florida 2 Electric Boogaloo. And I was like, I don't know. And so instead of giving the people what they wanted, I went off and wrote Cattail, The Wild, Weird Battle to Save the Florida Panther, which is a book I've been wanting to write for 25 years. But I didn't have a good ending, and I finally got a good ending, and so I sat down and wrote that one, and it came out, and it was okay. The reception, it was the start of the pandemic, so I didn't get to go out and talk about it much. But the whole time I was thinking, is there a way to do a sequel to Oh, Florida? Is there a way to tell people more stuff about Florida that they may not know, or to just sort of celebrate that spirit of Florida weirdness. So I thought, well, maybe I could do a collection of columns and stories that have run over the last 30 years that sort of have that same spirit of O Florida. So that's the origin story for the state you're in, Florida Men, Florida Women, and Other Wildlife, because it talks about such classic Florida topics as the Florida mermaid industry, because we do have a whole industry of people pulling on prosthetic tails and swimming around and waving at the tourists. The love story of the most tattooed woman alive, and I always hasten to add that last word because I think it's important, the most tattooed woman alive. And nudists who get into a fight with the post office over their packages. No, those other packages, I'm sorry, yeah. Get your mind out of the gutter. Fugitives, con men, death row inmates, I should tell you this. I should tell you this one. There's a story in there about a scientist who discovered a legendary creature that was supposed to not exist. There was this creature in the Panhandle known as the leopard eel that was supposed to be this long, skinny creature that lived in the swamps and had little paddles for feet and weird-looking wings on its head like Captain America's helmet, and spots. And he actually accidentally stumbled upon one and found out it was real. And so he put it in a bucket and then took it home and put it in a Tupperware container and then called up a friend of his who's also a scientist. Together, they spent their own time and their own money writing up a scientific description of this thing, which they decided was not an eel at all. It's a type of salamander known as a siren. And so they named it the reticulated siren. And those little wings are actually external gills for the siren. And so after the story ran, and this is all in the book, after the story ran, I got this very stiff letter from a New York patent attorney who wanted to let me know that his clients at Tupperware wanted to be sure that it really was a genuine Tupperware container and not some other brand of plastic storage container that you burp whenever you put it away. And I wrote back and said, listen, I know Tupperware is a Florida-based product. I know there's a museum in Kissimmee where you can go and go around and burp all the historic Tupperware. And so I would never cast aspersions on a fine Florida product like that. And in fact, I think you guys are missing a bet. I think that you should contact these scientists and get them to endorse your product and tell their fellow scientists, if you find a legendary creature, this is the way to hang on to it. Put it in Tupperware. They have not done that for some reason. There's also a piece in there about these two women who, during the week, they run a dog grooming salon, and then on the weekends they go down to the Everglades and hunt pythons. Like you do. The whole sort of subculture of python hunters just fascinated me. There's also a piece in there about why iguanas keep turning up in people's toilets down in South Florida, which in our climate-changing world may soon be happening to all of us, but for now it's just down in South Florida. That also includes the story of the guy, they sometimes, when the temperature drops far enough, since they're cold-blooded animals, they'll kind of sort of freeze up. They'll be cold stunned, and they'll fall out of the trees, because that's where they like to live. Well, there's this guy in Key Biscayne, he was driving home, and he happened to turn a corner and see, on the corner there, 40 cold-stunned iguanas just lying on the ground, and he thought, dinner! So he, stopped the car, jumped out, started collecting the iguanas in his arms like cordwood, put them in the car, started heading for home, made big plans for his dinner that night, and he didn't think it through. He had the heater on in the car, so pretty soon the iguanas are all waking up and running around, and he drove off the road and crashed, and I ultimately had leftovers, I think. So, to me, this is sort of the symbolic of life in Florida, that, you never know when you're going to run across what looks like a good thing and maybe doesn't end up so good. And it may pop up in your toilet at 3 a.m. or it may, suddenly wake up in your car. But to me, there's lots of great stories out there. And one of the themes of the book is Florida stories and Florida storytellers. So there are pieces in there sort of shouting out some Florida storytellers I like. One of them is Sarasota's own John D. McDonald. He gets a profile in there. telling you about I come from a whole family of mystery readers, and so, my grandfather worshiped at the altar of Perry Mason. My mom read everything Agatha Christie wrote. I started off with Encyclopedia Brown and then moved on to Sherlock Holmes and, Philip Marlowe and Sam Spade. And one day when I was 14, my great aunt cornered me and took a big drag on her Pall Mall, said, "I think you're ready for Travis McGee now," and handed me a paperback book with a very scantily clad lady on the cover, and I was, 14-year-old boy. Yes, ma'am, I'm definitely ready for that. Well, I wasn't really ready for what the stories he told, which were stories that were not set in New York or Los Angeles, but were set right here in Florida, and talked about, that this was a sunny place full of shady people who were ready to pave over everything if it made them a buck. So I learned a lot from John D. McDonald and sort of paid tribute to him. There's also pieces in there about Elmore Leonard, who was a part-time Florida man, and I think did more than any other author to establish the Florida man stereotype in the books that he set in Florida. He had a whole family called the Crows that would show up and do wild and wacky things. One of them he introduces in the novel Rum Punch. He starts off, was it Rum Punch? No, it was Maximum Bob, where he's telling his probation officer why he should not have been convicted of murder because he shot the wrong guy. He didn't shoot the guy he was meaning to kill. And then there's a piece in there about Charles Willeford. Have you guys ever heard of Charles Willeford? He's sort of the godfather of the wacky Florida crime novel. He wrote this great book called Miami Blues, and then he wrote 3 sequels. And one of the sequels is a book called Sideswipe. And when it came out in hardback, apparently one of the people who purchased the book didn't appreciate his sense of humor very much and mailed it back to him. And there was a note that said, in all caps, "It should be a crime to charge this much money for crap like this." And there were 6 bullet holes through the book. And so when Willeford told his friends about this, they were horrified, of course. They were like, "Oh my God, did you call the cops? Did you tell the FBI? At least let the postal inspectors know?" He's like, "No, it's good to get feedback." So I'm hoping this book gets some good feedback, but not like that. So when this book came out in September of 2021, it sold pretty well. And so the folks at University Press started looking at my back catalog and started realizing that my second book, Manatee Insanity, had not sold very well, and that manatees are in the news right now. And they thought, well, why don't we put that out in paperback and give Craig all of 2 pages to tell you everything that happened in the last 12 years since the book first came out. So that's why I have 2 paperbacks out at the same time, one from 2010 and one from 2021. But Manatee Insanity is sort of a history of how we got to where we are with manatees, how manatees wound up on the endangered list, and how they actually sort of made a big comeback before the recent manatee die-off. So we went from about 2,000 manatees to around 6,000 prior to the die-off. And there's lots of great stories in there, great characters. Jimmy Buffett and Bob Graham founding the Save the Manatee Club after a concert at which Bob Graham was asked by his daughter, "Hey, can we go to the Jimmy Buffett concert?" And he was like, "Sure, who's Jimmy Buffett?" So, anyway, so that's why there are 2 paperbacks out at once. And I think we're ready for trivia.
Yeah.
Because, I was trivial when trivia wasn't cool.
So I'm going to pass out some sheets and some pencils, but we'll go through it question by question. I'll ask the question, Craig will give the answer. You guys will obviously try to answer first. And then, of course, there's some stories that go along with it, so I'll pass those out now.
I don't think they're. Sure, you guys have
I don't know.
Oh, they're downstairs first. You're back.
Talk amongst yourselves. Thanks, by the way, for coming out on this day full of horrible weather outside. I really appreciate that.
I'm sure my brother has, but I don't believe it.
I should warn you, it's really dangerous to give me a live microphone and nothing to do with it. I'm liable to start singing Al Green songs. I wrote, the question was, when did I strike for the Sarasota Herald Tribune? I wrote for the Sarasota Herald Tribune from 1986 to 1989. And my wife-to-be was working there at the same time. And that's how we wound up dating and then getting married. So. The Herald Tribune? No, ma'am. I'm sorry, I was raised Southern. I fall every lady to death. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the illegal nudist B&B.
Yes.
Is there such a thing as illegal nudist?
Well, it went against their zoning. That was the problem.
Oh, so the
they-
B&B part that was illegal.
Yeah.
Okay. Just
I mean-
wondering.
I'm not a lawyer, nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn Express, but I think it's legal to be nude in your own home.
Okay.
Problem
That's
was they
all
weren't
right.
supposed to be running a commercial enterprise in a residential district.
Gotcha.
You gotta watch those technicalities.
Really?
They'll trip you up
No,
every
they
time.
don't understand, yeah, they were just.
Did the Tupperware household ever respond to it?
Basically, he sent me back a response and said, okay, that's fine. And that was it. But I am very disappointed they did not contact the scientists to at least say thank you, because they're getting free publicity out of them. You know, it was only partly a tongue-in-cheek suggestion that they get the endorsement, but at least say, you know, thank you for using our product, and, you know, here's an extra chafing dish or something like that, you know.
Here's a lid. Go find the bottom.
Exactly. You know, I bet that's a game they play in the Tupperware Museum. Match the lid.
You're welcome. We have one more. Thank you. All right, my glasses on.
Boy, I hope I know the answers.
All right, everybody. So question number 1. A minor league umpire in Clearwater once ejected the ballpark organist for playing what song? A, Take Me Out to the Ball Game. B, Flirting with Disaster. C, Three Blind Mice. Or D, Paradise by the Dashboard Light. What do you think it is?
I know it's three blind mice.
Three Blind Mice?
Yes.
Everybody agrees?
Yeah.
Craig?
Yeah, oh yeah. And then the story of that organist, Wilbur Snap, which is a great name, is in the state you're in. Because I had the pleasure of hanging out with him for a day, and everybody in the ballpark kept coming up to him going, "Hey, are you the guy they threw out?" "Yeah, I'm the guy they threw out." "Can I get your autograph?" "Sure."
All right, number 2. Florida's official state slogan is A, In God We Trust. B, Hold My Beer. C, These Are Not My Pants. Or D, Don't Tase Me, Bro. A?
It's correct, which I have been lobbying for years to change it, because to me, you know, just copying the official slogan of the United States is just terribly unimaginative. And I think any of these other 3 options would make great ones, especially the last one, because it was said by a Florida man, specifically a University of Florida student, right before he got tased.
All right, number 3. Dr. Robert Cade worked with University of Florida football players in developing the formula for what we now know as Gatorade. The players were cooperative up to a point, Cade said, but they drew the line at one thing. What was it? A, peeing into the cooler that would be dumped on the coach's head. B, having their rectal temperatures taken on the field. C, posing for semi-nude photos to advertise the new drink. Or D, drinking 8 gallons of the stuff every day. This is actually not that easy of a question. D?
The correct answer is B. They said nope, not going to let you do that. Nobody wants to have their rectal temperature taken, especially not on a football field during a game.
Oh, during a game?
Yeah.
Do you know how many days they drank 8 gallons of it?
Oh, I don't know if they drank 8 gallons.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Yeah, those are just made up.
All right, number 4. At his 1995 inauguration, re-elected Governor Lawton, how do you say that last?
Lawton Childs.
Childs. Sorry guys, I'm not Floridian, or I am now, but you know. That
Yeah.
one here.
You'll
Celebrated by firing what projectiles at the governor's mansion? A. T-shirts. B. Campaign flyers. C. Worn out walking shoes. Or D. Potatoes. C. You one B. I heard A. C.
The correct answer is potatoes. Lawton had a potato gun and he was not afraid to use it. You may have been fooled by the walking shoes because Lawton Chiles was famous for walking the length of the state while he was campaigning for the U.S. Senate, and that's how he got the nickname Walking Lawton. But he actually wore a coonskin cap to the inauguration and fired the potato gun at the governor's mansion.
Wow.
He was just shooting at the building he was living in. Not anyone in particular.
Like a
Just because
firework.
he could.
Yeah.
All right, number 5. True or false? The pesky love bugs native to Florida were created by a University of Florida lab experiment gone horribly awry, originally intended to be unleashed on FSU. False.
Correct. They're actually an invasive species from Central America, and they came to Texas first, but they really like us here in Florida. I actually interviewed a guy one time who was a scientist who studies love bugs, and he said if people would just look at them, they'd realize how beautiful they are. And I said, well, they got to scrape them off their paint job first, you know.
All right, number 6. 7 years ago, the Guinness Book of World Records recognized a Jacksonville man's collection of what as the largest in the world? A. Empty cans of Billy beer. B. Junk bonds. C. Fossilized poop. Or D. I Dream of Jeannie memorabilia. C. A. D. I heard a D.
C, fossilized poop, and the place where they chose to celebrate the recognition was the South Florida Museum in Bradenton, where they put on a display something like 1,200
On display?
On display, yes, and I think he had some mammoth poop and some other stuff like that. If you have mammoth poop, go see your doctor though.
Were these all identified though? By
Yes.
the creature that
Yeah.
provided it?
Yeah, they're
It's a
called
real thing.
coprolites. That's the official scientific name, but I like to call things what they are.
Yeah, it's a real
All right, number 7. One of Miami's distinctions is that it is the only major metropolis in America that what? A. Was founded by women. B. Once required everyone to carry a gun. C. Set a dress code in the 1980s mandating pastilles. Or D. Has no actual speed limit. A.
A is correct.
I heard a D.
Yeah, A is correct. Julia Tuttle and Mary Brickle are the two founders of Miami. And we actually talked about that in a recent Welcome to Florida podcast, which, by the way, I encourage everybody who's into podcasts to take a listen. We do this every week, and our conceit is that 900 new people move to Florida every day, and nobody tells them what they've gotten into. So we try and educate them by interviewing historians, scientists, cultural people. We've interviewed the owner of the oldest restaurant in Florida. We interviewed an expert on Cuban sandwiches, which, by the way, is the most divisive subject in Florida. We've interviewed an expert on Florida's history of lynchings. We've done some serious stuff. We've talked to such Florida icons as Carl Hyacin and Tim Dorsey, Clyde Butcher, Betty Osceola. And so our joke is we always have fun and sometimes we have sponsors. And one of our regular sponsors is Visit Sarasota. So
All right, cool. And where can everybody find that podcast?
anywhere you find podcasts, I always go to Buzzsprout, but that you can find it on iTunes, Spotify, etc. Yeah.
And what's the
Look
name
for
of
Welcome
the
to Florida.
podcast? The name
Well,
of the podcast?
The name of the podcast is Welcome to Florida or WTF.
They should subscribe.
But we don't emphasize that.
All right, number 8. The University of South Florida's women's basketball team was originally known by what biologically impossible moniker? A. The Flying Penguins. B. The Two-Horned Unicorns. C. The Lady Bulls. Or D. The Gator Crocs. C.
Yeah, so the Lady Bulls, which, those are cows. And now they're just
Lady
called
Bull
the
sounds
Bulls.
better
Now
than
they're just
cow.
bulls.
All right, number 9. The famous PBS painting instructor Bob Ross was a Florida man. Born in Daytona Beach, he opened his original workshop and gallery in New Smyrna Beach. What few people knew about him was that he'd altered his appearance how? A, had a facial tattoo surgically removed. B, paid a doctor to implant a third nipple. C, he had his nose lengthened. Or D, his hair was naturally straight. D? C? What is it, Craig?
It's the hair. It's the hair. When he started off, he didn't have much money, and so he thought, well, to save on haircuts, I'll get a perm, and that way I won't have to cut my hair. And the perm happened right before he started to become really famous, and so then it became his brand, and he had to keep doing it. And
he could afford the haircut, but just couldn't get it.
He hated it. He hated the perm, but it's the way everybody recognized him, so he had to keep doing it.
All right, number 10, last one. 3 of these are real Florida professions, and 1 is fake. Pick the phony. A, state park mermaid. B, drive-through window gator guard installer. C, python hunter. And D, iguana trapper. B, pretty resounding B.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's nothing to stop someone from throwing a gator through your drive-thru.
Unfortunately.
Which really happened in I think 2016. A guy in Loxahatchee threw an alligator through a Wendy's drive-thru window, and he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, i.e. the gator. The gator is okay, but I just want to let you guys know that.
All right, so now we'll open it up to questions from all of you. So who has a question for Craig? Just raise your hand.
You want to tell people about your weekly email that comes out?
Oh,
as you
okay,
get the
yes,
podcast?
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you for suggesting it. So every week, in addition to doing the podcast, I do a weekly author newsletter, cleverly titled "Oh Florida, the Newsletter," and in it, one of the features is every week I count down the top 5 Oh Florida stories of the week, and believe me, it's always hard to cut to just 5. So when people say, "Oh, Florida's no weirder than any place else," like, yeah, do you produce weird news every day? I don't think so.
I have a question. Did your interest in the weird side of Florida begin with your journalism career, covering those stories?
Gosh, that's a hard question. I guess the thing is, when you grow up in Florida, you feel like weird stuff is normal stuff. You don't realize it's weird. So, I grew up in a town where there's a house that has a UFO on the top of it. And I thought, oh, well, surely every beach town has that. We had a politician nicknamed the Bandy Rooster who made his fortune selling hula hoops. Yeah, everybody's got those, right? And another politician who made his money running the state's first drive-through funeral home. It's like, oh yeah, that's like that everywhere, right? Well, it wasn't until I went off to college in Alabama that I realized things aren't like that everywhere.
Any other questions?
I think somebody over here had one.
Go on.
Is the panther population still expanding north of the Hatch?
Yes, they have been very happy to see that the Panthers. Let me give just a real quick background. So, sort of the plot of Cattail is that Florida Panthers used to range over the whole southeast, and at the start of the book, they are mostly confined south of the Caloosahatchee River, south of Fort Myers, because they've lost habitat, they've lost numbers to hunters, and so forth. And they were suffering from genetic defects because the population had dwindled so small, there was inbreeding. And so, sort of the centerpiece of the story is this last-ditch attempt to save them by bringing in new genetic material. And it succeeds so well that they start moving northward and actually move into new parts of Florida. And so, yes, that's still going on. They still have not figured out the cause. There's been some mysterious deaths, apparently due to a neurological problem, which may be related to poison someone's putting out, or it may just be some viral problem. They haven't figured it out yet. But it does not seem to be widespread at this point, and it's not passed on from mothers to kittens, which is good to know as well. So even though that's a problem, it's not a widespread problem. So I contend that the panther is the biggest success story ever in the Endangered Species Act history. I mean, because they were almost wiped out in the 1990s.
Go ahead.
Do you want to talk about this and why they don't sell it at Selby Gardens?
Hold that up. All right.
This book, The Scent of Scandal.
This is my book, The Scent of Scandal, Greed, Betrayal, and the World's Most Beautiful Orchid, which is about how Selby Botanical Gardens here in Sarasota wound up facing criminal charges. It's the first scientific institution in America to ever be charged with wildlife trafficking because they participated in the naming of a previously unknown orchid species, the Phragmipedium cavachii, which was brought to them by this guy from West Virginia named Kovac, and his only condition was, name it for me. So they did, which was like hanging a sign on his back saying, please come arrest me, because he had not bothered to deal with any of the proper paperwork to get it out of Peru, where he found it. And so my previous books, Paving Paradise and Manatee Insanity, are both sort of environmental history books. This one's just a good yarn because I structured it sort of like a mystery. And so the chapters are shorter, the sentences are much tighter. Each chapter ends on a sort of a cliffhanger ending, so it makes you want to read to the next chapter. And as a result, look on the back of the book. I just want you to verify this. Up at the top, it says the category of book is true crime / gardening, which I think it's the only book of that type.
No, but I gotta just applaud you because this was the first book of yours I read when I moved here 2 years ago because I lived right across from Selby Gardens, and I have my PhD, and I'm reading it and I'm going, wow, this guy, I mean, the amount of research that you did and really the level-handedness that you put in all of it, was to be applauded.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. That one, it's not my bestseller, but it still sells pretty well to both orchid people and mystery fans.
It really is.
Let me tell you 2 quick stories about it. One was I covered the case for the St. Pete Times, the then St. Pete Times, and then wrote a magazine story for Sarasota Magazine when the case was over. And I thought, well, I know this story pretty well. I can easily turn this into a book. And I got into it and realized there's a whole aspect of it that I was missing down in Peru. I didn't know what was going down in Peru. And I worked on it for about 6 months, and my deadline was about a month away. And I called this one orchid expert up in Canada who someone had said, oh, he's got the whole story. And when we talked, after we talked for a few minutes, he said, you really don't know anything, do you? Which is not what you want to hear when you're a month away from deadline. One of the main characters in there is a guy who was convicted of orchid smuggling in Miami and then disappeared. And I wanted to get a picture of him to run in the books, just in case somebody sees him. And so I applied, I sent a public records request to the U.S. Marshals Service. That's the federal agency that tracks fugitives. I figured they'd be the ones to be on the lookout for this guy. And months went by, and finally, really close to my deadline, I heard back from them at last, and they said, we will verify that we have a file on this gentleman, and we will give you permission to use a photo of him from that file if you can get his permission first. Well, if you can't find him, how am I supposed to find him? Fortunately, one of my other sources said, oh, you're looking for a picture of him? I've got one of those here. So it worked out, but I'm sweating there for a bit.
What other questions? Go ahead.
I have 2 questions. One, did you ever get to Peru?
No, I did not.
Okay.
That book was published by the University Press of Florida, which does not pay out huge advances for their books. I mean, it's a great press. I love them, but I make much more money when I'm working with the New York people. If that had been published by a New York publisher, yeah, I probably would have been able to go to Peru. But fortunately, I found people in Peru who are willing to talk to me on the phone.
Oh, great.
And also, one of my friends, one of my kids' teachers, their Spanish teacher, she said, oh, I'm from Peru, I'll help you out. So, I'd gotten some videos and things like that, and she went through and interpreted them for me, told me what they said. So she gets a special shout out in there. Gisela Bosco, I owe her big time.
And the other question is, if they still use the Dewey Decimal System, how do they categorize gardening /
I am not an expert on either Mr. Dewey or his decimal system. I don't know. I could ask my son, who spent the summer working as an assistant librarian.
Oh, good.
So I'll quiz him on that when I get home.
I think you just pick one.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure there's one for true crime, and who knows how many different variations of that there are. But I'm willing to bet this is the only one in the category.
Okay, so go on.
I think my favorite part of reading the book was now I'm interested. I know I never read Encyclopedia Brown as a child, so I'm going to pick up one of those. And then Charlotte Gutenberg.
I'm sorry?
Charlotte Gutenberg, the woman who is tattooed.
Oh, yes, Charlotte Gutenberg,
Yes,
the most tattooed woman
I'd
alive.
like to get one of hers. So that was great that you could introduce us to some things that probably, I mean, I didn't know about them. I bet my brother.
I'm very happy to hear that, because that's my goal, is to tell you. I want to tell you about my favorite state, what I contend is the most interesting state, and also spur you to find out some more on your own. You know, go visit a state park, go tubing down a river, go read some of these books that I mentioned. And there's a piece in there on the most famous author you've never heard of, Donald J. Sobel, who wrote all the Encyclopedia Brown books for kids, and was living in Miami while he did it. And you know, he cranked out, I forget how many, it was like 40 or so.
Yeah, there were 40.
And each of them with 10 stories. So think how many stories there are, how many mysteries he had to create. And they're all very witty little stories and well-constructed mysteries. And he was very intent on not being known. He's like the anti, John Grisham or anti Stephen King, where he didn't let anybody take his picture. He never sat for a TV interview. He wanted everyone to focus on his character of Encyclopedia Brown. And the only sort of publicity he did, and it wasn't really publicity, was he went out and talked to kids in the schools and talked to them about the things that he'd learned and got their input on some things that he'd written, and they helped him to create some of his mysteries. He's just a really interesting character, and I should tell you that after, I read a bunch of them when I was a kid, and I read them to my kids as bedtime books, and after the book came out, my parents got into Encyclopedia Brown. My dad has a sort of degenerative eye disease, so my mom reads to him now, and they have read through almost all of the Encyclopedia Brown stories now. So he enjoys the humor in particular.
That
So
would be nice for Janet.
And before, go ahead.
Our reading festival, whatever happened to it and when, and why can't we get it started again?
I am not the person to ask about that. I may be an alleged literary legend, but I don't know.
You can help us get it back here.
Well, I would be happy to do whatever I could to help. I don't know who was in charge of it. I don't know who was putting it on. And the Florida Heritage Book Festival, after they declared me a literary legend, they went out of business. So maybe I'm not the right person to ask for help. They're like, oh, that's the best we could do. Oh well, might as well hang it up. By the way, if you are ever declared a literary legend, as far as I can tell, I was hoping it would mean, lifetime supply of key lime pie or something like that. But apparently all it means is you get free parking at every reading festival in the state, so.
And then before we get to the signing, can you talk a little bit about what you're working on now?
Yes. So I mentioned about the ladies hunting pythons in their story in this book. And that inspired me to go on and do some further research. And so now the book I'm working on is, and have pitched, my agent is sending the pitch out, so we'll see if somebody jumps on it, is a book about pythons in Florida, how they got here, what the challenges are in dealing with them, some of the really crazy stories about them. One of the crazy stories is that most of the python hunters that the state employs, they go out and hunt at night because that's when the snakes are active. And then during the day, they camp out at this campground that's next door to the skunk ape research headquarters, with research being a euphemism for come in and buy our t-shirts. And so, to me, it's like, well, why are y'all hunting pythons? If you go out and hunt skunk apes, you catch one of those, you'll be famous. Forget the whole python thing. But I've been doing research on this. I actually found the guy who discovered the first python in the Everglades back in 1979. And he's a retired park ranger. He lives up in the Pacific Northwest. I got his phone number and called him, and I said, listen, I'm really sorry to bother you, but I'm calling you about this thing that happened in 1979. I don't know if you remember it. And I started talking about it. He goes, oh, I remember that. I was on a date. He and his date were coming back from Miami, and on the Tamiami Trail, he saw in his headlights what appeared to him to be a very large rattlesnake, the largest one he'd ever seen. So he slammed on the brakes, jumps out, his date's going, "What are you doing?" And he runs up and sees that it's not a rattlesnake, it's not any kind of snake he's ever seen before, and he pulls it further out of the bushes, because it got run over behind the head. He pulls it further out of the bushes, it's 11 feet 9 inches long. And he starts dragging the carcass back to the car. And the date goes, what are you doing? He said, "I'm gonna take this home and skin it." "Not with me in the car," she says. And he goes, "Well, I'll come back for you." There was no second date.
Well, thank you so much, Craig, for being here with us.
Thank you guys for coming out.
And as I
and asking
mentioned,
good questions.
yeah, and as I mentioned before, if you haven't gotten your books yet, we have a bunch downstairs. And if you have, you can just come up and ask Craig to sign them for you. And if you're interested in more of our events, then just make sure you sign up for our newsletter. There's a little sign up downstairs as well. But thanks so much, guys.
Okay.
Give yourself a round.